Yisro, yeah? So it's Parashat Yisro, and this is one of the most fundamental sedras in the Torah because of a few things, and we'll visit a few of them as we travel together. But before I start on the Rebbe's Sikha, I just want to make a general observation. Hi, Menachem. That let me just tell you where we are in history. It's 3,350 odd years ago when Am Yisrael received the Torah on Mount Sinai, and at that moment the world changed. The world changed in various ways. We learn all this when we do Shavuos. The spirit, until then, the spiritual was spiritual, the physical was physical. They didn't mix. You couldn't mix them together. The heavens were the heavens, the earth was the earth, and that's how it was. At the time of the giving of the Torah to Am Yisrael, that changed. There was a fundamental, basic structure in creation that changed, and that was that the spiritual could be dragged into the physical, and the physical could be elevated into the spiritual. And that dynamic was entrusted to humanity in general, but Am Yisrael in particular. And at the same moment as spirituality was evident in physicality, it began to be evident in physicality, we had the birth of a totally new dimension, a totally new intellectual dimension, and that was the introduction of morality. Now, it's difficult for us to conceive this, but until the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai, there was no such thing as morality. There were legal systems, there were ancient legal systems, but those legal systems were designed for the comfortable interaction of people one with the other, or they were designed for the enforcement of power by a minority kings and their henchmen, but there was no such idea as morally right or morally wrong. And that's very surprising for people who've never thought about it. But the reality is that, and we have to stop and understand this before we move any further, because without this, you're not going to have any chance of understanding the Sikha. With right and wrong don't have an intrinsic reality. So I'll give you an example. We say that it's wrong to murder. So you can say, well, it must have always been wrong to murder, but that isn't true. It may have been wrong to murder for logical reasons. It may have been bad for the power of certain people, but the intrinsic right or wrong of murder didn't exist until Mount Sinai. Until Hashem gave the Torah to the world, the right and wrong was based on logic. Now, you can test that logic. I mean, you take the most civilized, we were talking about it before the Shia, the most civilized nation on earth until the middle of the last century were the Germans. The Germans and the Austrians were the most cultured, civilized, intellectual nation on earth. They had the best music and the best drama and the best literature, and they had philosophers, Wittgenstein, and people who of enormous depth of intellect. And when Hitler, Yamach Shemoy, began to convince the masses that there was some intrinsic evil in Jews, and that we poisoned their water and murdered their children, God forbid, and whatever other garbage he sold them, those people, when they began to believe that, it wasn't a very big leap to say, well, if we're in danger, we have to deal with these Jews. And therefore, to deal with those Jews was an intellectually necessary step. And if you're going to be dealing with them, you want to deal with them as efficiently as possible. So if it's better to kill them because that they're a menace, they're a disease, God forbid, then it's better to invent a way to kill them as efficiently as possible. And that's what happens if you have human seichel dictating what you do and what you don't do without a break, without any kind of harness. When the Torah was given on Mount Sinai, when the Aseres Hadibros, the Ten Commandments, were given on Mount Sinai, for the first time there was introduced into human reality the concept of right or wrong being impenetrably unchangeable. Why? Because it was God's will, God's direction. And if a person accepted God, and if they accepted the Torah, which we'll come to in a minute, let's do that now. What's the proof? What's the proof for Jews that we know what we're learning, that we serve the one and only God? How do we know? So there are many religions. There have been historically more than 15,000 religions. Did you know that? From the dawn of time. Most of them were Avodah Zarah, most of them still are, but those 15,000 religions all had their own points of view, left and right, right and left. And many of them had prophets, whether it was Buddha or whether it was Yoshka, or whether it was Muhammad or whoever it was, and they all say they spoke to God, and they all say that they've got it right, and we say we've got it right, but what's the difference in the proof? The difference in the proof is that Yoshka says that he met God. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. Muhammad said he met God. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. We don't know. We know one thing: Jews are very skeptical. So the fact that he says he met God isn't good enough proof for us. But what happened with Yisrael? 3 million people all witnessed the same thing at Mount Sinai, that Hashem gave Yisrael the Ten Commandments at Mount. And Moshe then was sufficiently credible to go up on the mountain and receive the rest of the Torah. But the only time in history that Hashem revealed himself to so many people, and since then we've had our Torah, which is completely pristine. It's correct to, I don't know if you know this, the only correction in the Torah is there's an argument whether it's 1 letter or 2 letters. And this is on a document, try and understand this, it's been all over the world, separated between continents where people had no access to it, one to the other, and the Torah, whether it was in China or in Japan or in Africa or ultimately in America or in Europe, any part of Europe, it's always been exactly the same. It hasn't been challenged, hasn't been argued. everybody testifies to the one incident. And if you want to know how strongly that is, you can test that, is that if, let's pretend Moshe Rabbeinu was lying and made up the Torah for himself, then you have to say that when he came down the mountain with the Torah, which talks about what happened last week, the last month and the month before that, why didn't all those people say, what are you talking about? You're lying. We didn't see any of this. Not one Jew has ever said that in the history of the world since the giving of the Torah. So we know that there was this Giloi, this revelation by God of the Ten Commandments, and then ultimately the remaining 603 commandments which make up our mitzvah system. And we know that was there because it's testified by everybody who witnessed it, the only time in history. Now, in that information, there is God saying, from now on, there is going to be a system of right and wrong. And we define right and wrong very simply. Right is consistent with what I'm telling you to do, and wrong is consistent with what I'm telling you not to do. And from that point on, we have a reference system of good and evil, and we have a reference system of morality, and we are expected, Am Yisrael is expected to be a light to all the nations, in other words, to show by example that if we live in a way that we live according to Ratzon Hashem, to the will of Hashem, and we don't do the things that we are forbidden to do, then people will learn from us and civilization will grow and flourish. And I'm just going to sketch this in quickly, but it's not really part of this year, but it's a matter of completeness. I'm putting it in. You know, in order to have free choice, one of the absolute fundamentals of Torah is that in order to have free choice, there has to be an equal choice. The choice has to be equal on both sides. You can't say, choose one of the two things in the corner of this room. If the one thing in the corner of the room is $1 million and one thing in the corner of the room is a handkerchief, nobody's going to take the handkerchief. That's not free choice. Free choice has got to be where the value of the two things is the same, and you've got to struggle to choose which you're going to choose. Now, from the moment that Hashem introduced morality into the world and an army of people who were to enforce this morality, or to live this, enforce is the wrong word, to live this morality by example, everybody would have jumped and taken it because its value is so obvious. So what did Hashem do? He introduced at that moment, and the key to this is the word Sinai. Sinai means hatred. He introduced anti-Semitism at one level or another. It's a virus. Anti-Semitism is a virus. It'll never go. You can have all the anti-hate speech legislation. It's wonderful. I believe in it. It's terrific. If Australia can do it, it's great. But you should know that somebody, it's on a video in dollars, somebody asked the Rebbe, could it happen again? And the Rebbe's answer was, in the morning before dawn. Right? Anti-Semitism is a virus. And it's there because of the kedusha, of the holiness of the moral system which was introduced by what happened at Mount Sinai. So just as the kedusha was introduced, holiness was introduced, right and wrong was introduced, so there has to be an opposing virus, and that virus has been there since Mount Sinai. And like every virus, it morphs. You attack it with medicine, and it morphs into something else. So it used to be from Christianity that we killed their God. I mean, it's really it's really extraordinarily laughable that so many millions of people can believe that a human being can kill their God. How can you kill a God? And you know, there are some very intelligent Christians. So where did they get? So that was fashionable for a period of time. Then they had to admit that it wasn't the Jews, it was the Romans. So the anti-Semitism morphed into various things. It morphed into that we made too much money. It morphed into the fact that we didn't make enough money. In the 19th century, a man came along and introduced the idea of there being different races. That was picked up by Hitler, as you know. Suddenly it was a race thing. Now, all after the war, race became very unfashionable. It was very terrible to call somebody racist, and no one was proud of that anymore. So the virus then morphed into you know what it morphed into then? Human rights. All of a sudden, Jews don't understand human rights. We've been the absolute leaders of human rights throughout history, and all of a sudden we are anti-human rights, and we are guilty of war crimes. War crimes. Yisrael, when all the nations of the world were torturing each other and having and hanging people in the town squares and selling tickets for it, or guillotining them in Paris, and Jews never touched a hair on the head of anybody, and all of a sudden we're guilty of human rights and apartheid. It's unbelievable. But that virus is there because you have to understand the koyach, the power of the fact that we take it for granted, but there is a notion of right and wrong, and the only way you can define that notion of right and wrong is in accordance with God's will or not in accordance with God's will. Everything else doesn't work, because if you want to, if you go to rely on human intellect, you have the Holocaust, so this week's Sedra introduces this very deep and powerful notion of morality, and it does that through the Ten Commandments. Now, Moshe Rabbeinu, I haven't got time to go through the history of this, but Moshe Rabbeinu left Mitzrayim because he was suspected of, he actually killed somebody, a Mitzrayim who was harming another Jew. Anyway, so he ran away to Midian, married his wife in Midian, had children with her in Midian. They lived there for 40 years. Then Hashem appears to him at the snare, at the bush, which we've learned about recently, and tells him to go to Mitzrayim and tell the Jews to leave Mitzrayim, take them out of bondage. And Moshe does all of that. We learned that last week and the week before, and he does all of that, and Am Yisrael have the miracle of Kriyas Yamsuf, of the crossing, of the splitting of the sea, and I explained last week what that meant spiritually, how the sea dividing was evidence of Shem Havaya rather than Shem Elohim. We can't go into that, it's too complicated, and we did it a couple of weeks ago. But after all of that, they get to Mount Sinai, and Hashem appears and all 3 million souls, 600,000 men, 600,000 of women and their children, they all witnessed the giving of the Ten Commandments, the first two. They only heard the first two because they couldn't stand it. It was too much for them. The ecstasy of the exposure to direct godliness took their souls away, and Hashem had to reinstate their souls in all their. And they then went to Moshe and said, "We can't do this. It's too hard. We just can't stay alive. The ecstasy is so great." So he accepted the shlichus of going up onto Har Sinai, and he stayed there for 40 days and 40 nights, as you know, and came down with the remaining 8 commandments and the rest of the Torah. Now, when Yisroi, his father-in-law, who the Sedra is named after, heard about this, he had to come and see for himself. And Yisroi, was an extraordinary person. He was a Kohen, he was a priest of every form of avodah zarah that there was in the world until then. He was Baki, he knew everything about all their nonsense, all the what would later on become the Greek gods, what later on become the Roman gods, what the Aztec gods, every single avodah zarah he was an expert in. And it's explained, and we haven't got time to do it now, but it's deep Kabbalah that his expertise was necessary after the giving of the Torah to convert his darkness into light. And that's a pattern for you. What you and I have got to do, is you'll see as the Pesika goes on. So he comes to see Moshe Rabbeinu and to see what happened. Now, this is a few days after. The timeline is this: Moshe Rabbeinu goes up on Har Sinai, gets the Torah, comes down, he breaks the luchos, he breaks the tablets, goes back up again. Finally, Yom Kippur, Hashem says, "Salachti, I forgive you," and for the golden calf. And immediately after that, when they were forgiven, Yisroi arrives. And Yisroi arrives to see his son-in-law, Moshe Rabbeinu, and Moshe Rabbeinu, who's been talking to God for 40 days plus another 40 days and another 40 days. And it's very hard to explain to somebody that hasn't. If you ever stood in front of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, I'll give you an example. The koyach that came off you grew, you physically, mentally, spiritually, I don't think physically, spiritually grew. It was an experience where you moved away a better person. He infused you with his koyach for goodness. Now Moshe Rabbeinu, and you have to have a Moshe Rabbeinu in every generation. So what we understood from seeing the Rebbe, and I'm not just talking about Chabad, there are other great Rebbes who the same experience. So Moshe Rabbeinu suddenly was faced by people who were arguing. They're arguing. Jews argue. 2 Jews, 3 opinions, right? So he was sitting in judgment. And it says, the Sedra opens up by reporting that Yisro arrives in amongst Am Yisrael, and he sees Moshe judging the people. And Moshe's judging them all day and all night, and he comes over to him and he says, "What are you doing?" He says, "You've got to delegate, and you've got to delegate to tens and hundreds and thousands and so on." And Moshe follows his advice, and he does that. And the Rebbe asks an unbelievable question. He asks the question, really? This is such a stroke of genius to delegate? Who doesn't delegate? Every one of us, anybody who's in business, anybody who has jobs in their house, they give kids the job of taking out the garbage. Or what. Everybody delegates. So Moshe Rabbeinu needed Yisroi, the king of all the Avodah Zarahs, to come and give him this huge chokhmah that he should delegate, and therefore he'll have more time for it. So I need to take you forward for a minute, and then we'll come back to this. When the Torah, when the first two of the 10 Commandments were given, as I've explained, everybody heard it, but they couldn't stand it. Their neshamas left their guf. Their souls left their bodies. And it wasn't until Hashem changed that system that they were able to receive the Torah through Moshe Rabbeinu. So Moshe Rabbeinu thought that since he was the conduit for the remaining 8 of the 10 Commandments, he needed to be the conduit for Am Yisrael to receive the halakha, the law. And therefore, he assumed that since Am Yisrael needed him to be the conduit for the rest of the 10 Commandments and the rest of the mitzvah system, he also has to be the person who does the judging. What was wrong with that is a very, very deep and important personal thing. And that is this, that there's certain things that we get by way of gilui, by way of revelation. But there are certain things that we have to do, which is a product of what's yegia. Yegia means effort, right? What's yegia mean? Effort. So we need to work with the physical, because that's how we elevate the physical into the spiritual and bring the spiritual into the physical. What happened on Mount Sinai was not only was there a possibility for elevating the physical into the spiritual and bringing the spiritual into the physical, it became our mandate, our historical mandate from then until the coming of Mashiach. And that's what that is you and my purpose for living. It's really as bold as that. And let me tell you that for those who've traveled many times along these pathways, real Jewish fulfillment, real Jewish happiness, real Jewish sense of wealth and achievement comes from tuning into that process. Learning God's Torah and doing his mitzvahs for the purpose of elevating his physicality. So a Jew with enough training in Hasidus gets to learn that the physicality that he comes in contact with isn't an accident. It isn't good luck or bad luck. It isn't because you live in Bondi or because you live in Surrey Hills. It's because you as a neshama in a guf, you as a soul in a body, come in contact with that with a specific opportunity of elevating it. And if it's unpleasant, and you make the mistake of saying, well, this is unpleasant, just my bad luck. It's not your bad luck, it's your good luck. You're getting an opportunity from Hashem. You're not a victim of circumstance. You are a soldier retained by his general to get a job done. And getting that job done is the most satisfying thing you can possibly do when you tune into it. It's a whole different level of existence. As my first teacher used to say, it's the difference between living and existing. That's the difference. And the difference is one of focus, and the difference is one of purpose. So when Moshe Rabbeinu was judging and his father-in-law gave him this brilliant idea of delegating, what his father-in-law was saying to him was, look, you've got it wrong. I've learned from what's happened to you, Am Yisrael, that the system that I've come from, where people expected everything to be by way of gift from their robots, from their avodah zarah, from their idols, that doesn't work. You've got to go to work with God's spirituality and with God's physicality. And we are the bridge between those two things, and they don't need you, Moshe Rabbeinu, to be a revealer. What they need is for you to assign other people who are working with physicality to work together with the litigants, and they're having what they think is an argument about whose dress this is or whose coat this is, but what they're really doing is making destiny from physicality into spirituality, and bringing spirituality down into that physicality. So it's not your business to sit in judgment all day, Moshe, because they're not here any longer to get it direct from God. They're here now to go to work, and to go to work with physicality. Okay, so l'chaim. So let's revise the 10 Commandments. There are 10 Commandments. The first one is that there are 5 between man and 5 between man and God. The first one is that we have to believe in God. That is a mitzvah. Not everybody understands that. This is not optional. It is not optional for a Jew to believe in God. You have to. So what happens if, like we were saying before this year started, when there's some people, they don't. That is not an option for a Jew. A Jew has got to believe in God. If he has any doubts, he's got to work on it. But I want to share this with you, and this is very deep, and you need to understand this for yourself. Every time a Jew doesn't believe in God, he is really stating that he passionately does believe in God. Why? Because let's say you have a tsunami, which seems like a senseless, criminal thing to do to humanity if God's in control. I'll tell you this, when my eldest daughter is a grandmother. When she was 3, she caught salmonella poisoning in her gallbladder, which was a very rare thing in those days. And she had an operation which was a life and death operation. Baruch Hashem, everything was all right. The operation took place in Prince of Wales Hospital in Randwick. When we left her bedside to go home, it was very late at night. The only exit from the hospital was through the children's cancer ward. Right? You ever been in the children's cancer ward in Prince of Wales Hospital? I tell you, there's nothing worse. Little kids with bald heads, and it's so tragic. It tears your heart out. Right? You have to be made of stone not to. So there are Jews who say, well, where's God? Where's God in the children's cancer ward? Why is he doing this? Right? And we say that's a huge question. It's not for this year. It's not for why bad things happen to good people is a very important philosophical, religious concept, but it's not for tonight. I just want to say to you that in relation to what we're saying tonight is, why is it that somebody says, well, where's God? It's because he passionately does believe in God. Why? Because if there was no God, What would be wrong with a cancer ward? If there was no God, what would be wrong with somebody murdering somebody? If there's no God, who cares? I mean, it's the law of the jungle. So the stronger will eat the weak. It's only because we do believe in God, and we believe in God so passionately, that when we are confronted with an apparent shocking injustice, we feel violated. Why do we feel violated? Because of the very belief that we have. But the first mitzvah is to believe in God, and all Jews have that as a mandatory. It's the first of the 10 commandments. The second is that we're not allowed to have idols. We don't pray to cash flows. We don't have predictions of things we don't believe in money as a god. And those Jews that do are in trouble, because they're not functioning in terms of money is a bracha from Hashem, and we all want money. Everybody wants it. It's normal, but to believe in its koyach, when you're sitting in Central Synagogue and Mr. Billionaire walks in and half the row stands up for him, they're not standing up for him. They're standing up for his money. You're not allowed to stand up for somebody's money. Stand up for him is terrific, but if you got to know who you're standing up for. That's number 2. Number 3 is that we're not allowed to swear falsely or take Hashem's name in vain. Number 4 is we have to keep Shabbos. Jews have to keep Shabbos. At one level, or I don't say that every Jew can keep Shabbos according to all the halakhas. Of course they can, but most Jews have had the Holocaust behind them, and a generation where we were torn away from our heritage. And many Jews are relearning and on a pathway of new education for themselves. Doesn't matter what their age is. The Rebbe said people are not spiritually the age on their passport necessarily, but an attempt has to be made to keep Shabbos. 6 days we work. 6 days. What does it mean, work? It means what we were talking about: elevating the physical into the spiritual and bringing the spiritual down into the physical. Shabbos we stop. Shabbos we stop that process. 6 days a week, you're not allowed to eat like a glutton. You know that? 6 days a week, we eat to feed a body in order that the body should be strong and healthy to serve Hashem. We make a bracha before we eat. We make a bracha when we finished eating. The eating is seen as a holy process. Shabbos, you got to pig out. Shabbos, you have whatever you want. The 5th one is you have to honor your father and mother. The 6th one is we're not allowed to murder. The 7th one is we're not allowed to commit adultery, to the disappointment of many people. Mind you, the halakhas on that are very complicated, you should know. I'll give you an example. The definition of adultery is having intercourse with a married woman. The problem is, what's married? You know, there's a very big discussion, we haven't got time for it, but there's a very big discussion on what Yosef, why he didn't sleep with Potiphar's wife. Why didn't he sleep with her? She was trying to get him to sleep with him for 5 years, every day. I don't know if you know, the Talmud says that she was one of the most beautiful women in history, ever. And this woman was jumping on him every day for 5 years, and he didn't give in to her. And his prize for not giving in to her was being thrown into an Egyptian jail, where you never got out. It was disease, death, and that. So the question is, why didn't he sleep with her? So the obvious answer is that she was a married woman. But that's not a marriage we're talking about. We're talking about an Ashes Ish, and an Ashes Ish is a Jewish woman married to a Jewish man. If she's not a Jewish woman, don't take this as a license to go and do whatever you like, because that would be a pity. I'm just trying to illustrate to you that it's not as simple as it sounds, not to commit adultery. Anyway, number 8 is we're not allowed to kidnap. Number 9 is we're not allowed to bear false witness. And number 10 is the most fascinating one of all for us, because we learn Hasidus together, and that is that you're not allowed to covet. That you're not allowed to covet. Covet means to want, I don't know how. Envy a person's money or livestock, house, wife. And let's just take a quick detour on that. Why not? I mean, be fair. If you're living next door to a gorgeous, beautiful woman, why isn't it natural, or maybe it is natural, but why can't you succumb, if she's interested, in sleeping with her? Or you drive a rotten old derelict car which rattles and scratches as you go along the road, and your neighbour next door comes in a brand new, whatever your fancy is, Bentley, beautiful big Bentley, and it's not natural to say, well, I wish I had that Bentley. I want that Bentley. Why does God give him a Bentley like that? Why can't I have a Bentley like that? Just my luck. So, but really, from everything that we've learned together, you know that you're going to have the car that you need for you to do your job in this world, and he's going to have the wife that he has in order to do his job in this world. And it may be that the very reason that this woman who is so beautiful lives next door to you is that you can resist in wanting her. I'm not suggesting that all of a sudden you have to change your physiology. I'm saying that in terms of will, in terms of perspective, in terms of focus, it's forbidden. And if it's forbidden and it's against Hashem's will, we don't want it. That's why we don't covet. We don't covet because we have a deep understanding that Hashem is running the world by Hashgacha Pratis, by divine providence, and every part of that divine providence is what you come in contact with, and you're coming in contact with those things deliberately. So we have no, as we keep learning over and over again, you have no brera, you have no free choice on what you come in contact with, because that's Hashgacha Pratis, that's divine providence, but you have absolute free choice in how you react to it. So if that woman is the most beautiful woman that ever walked on the face of the earth, and she lives next door to you, you have the absolute free choice of tuning into the fact that it's forbidden as the 10th commandment to covet her, and you stop. Okay. Now, when Am Yisrael gathered together to get the 10 commandments, there appears to be a massive printing error in the Torah. I won't quote the pasuk to you because it will take too long, but the Torah records that there was an unbelievable light show, the earthquakes and sound of a shofar, and light and thundering and etc. And then it says this, and it sounds like it's a typo. It says that Am Yisrael saw the thunder and heard the lightning. Okay? Now, obviously, one's reaction is it should have been that they saw the lightning and heard the thunder. So why is it round the wrong way? Maybe the Torah made a mistake. If you still think like that, we've achieved nothing together. So what does this mean that they saw the thunder and heard the lightning? So it's explained in Chassidus by all our Rebbeim over and over again. This is one of the deepest bits of Torah that you'll ever learn, because what it means is this, that when we say that after Matan Torah the physical was able to be combined with the spiritual and the spiritual with the physical, what we're saying is, we're saying that it suddenly became, let's use baby language, it became possible to bring heaven down to earth and elevate earth up to heaven. What's heaven? Heaven is a Gilui Elokus, is a revelation of godliness. What's earth? A lack of a revelation of godliness. We don't see God unless you need a serious psychiatrist. You know, we see the results of what God does, but we don't palpably see God. We see this table. We accept that Hashem is bringing that into existence. If you don't believe that, then you've got to go back to the first commandment and learn more Torah, and you'll learn that everything in physicality is being brought into existence every moment. But we don't see that spirituality. We hear about it. We hear that we're supposed to learn Torah. We're supposed to do mitzvahs. We're supposed to go to shul and daven. If you can't go to shul, daven without going to shul. These are things that we hear from what we learn. We don't see godliness. We don't see what's happening when we daven or when we learn Torah and do mitzvahs. We hear about it. So that's because we live on earth in physicality. What's in heaven? In heaven, the Malachim, the angels, for example, they don't know what breakfast is. They don't understand. They hear about breakfast. Yeah, on earth, they eat breakfast. What's breakfast? Why do they eat breakfast? They have no idea why. So they have to be educated as to why we eat breakfast. So they hear why we eat breakfast. But what they see is godliness, and when they see that openly, that's what it means, heaven, that God is revealed in heaven. So what happened on Mount Sinai is this very deep reality that humanity, Jewish humanity, 3 million people, saw what normally was heard. What does that mean? They had a Gilui Elokus, they had a revelation of godliness, which was palpable. They were in touch with it. And that which they usually see, breakfast, was suddenly remote from them. Who cares about breakfast? But there's a very famous statement by one of the Rebbeim who wasn't Chabad, called I'll tell you his name in a minute. They're talking about eating on Yom Kippur. Eating on Yom Kippur is forbidden. Obviously, everybody knows that. And, you know, Jews who are inexperienced with Yom Kippur wish each other well over the fast, and you're fasting, when we actually miss breakfast and lunch. I mean, let's be clear about it. So you miss breakfast and lunch once. I mean, there are plenty of people in Gaza and Africa who would love to have breakfast and miss just one breakfast and lunch. And oh, I need a coffee, and I'm getting a headache because of the lack of this and the lack of that. And this Rebbe was approached by someone and asked a question on what he can eat and what he couldn't, what's the shear for eating. And the Rebbe said to him, it's Yom Kippur. Who can eat? It's not a matter of I'm doing the right thing by fasting. And who can eat on Yom Kippur? You're standing in front of your God. You're seeing rather than hearing. If you're spending the day properly, who can eat? That's the level we're talking about. So when it says that they heard the lightning and they saw the thunder, what it's explaining, that what the very deep message here is that a Jew has a capacity at some point of time in his day, every week, every year, whatever it is, to tune in to a level of revelation of godliness which empowers him to be part of the spiritual as well as being part of the physical. So he ignores the physical for a moment and focuses on the spiritual. Can't do it too long, because our job is with Gashmias. We're not Malachim. We're not here to be in heaven. We're here to be on earth. But we're here to elevate the earth into spirituality and bring spirituality down into the earth, into physicality. All right, I'm about halfway through the Sikha, guys, as always. One other important thing. It says that Jews got 2 crowns on that day, one for Nasev and one for Nishma. They were offered the Torah by Hashem before Hashem gave it to us. And the Jews said Nasev and Nishma. Nasev means we will do, and Nishma means we will hear, we will understand. And it says that we got 2 crowns for that. What does that mean? It means that we didn't say, explain it to us, and if it makes sense, we'll do it. That's not how a Jew has to serve his God. If you learn that something is Ratzon Hashem, is the will of Hashem, we accept it. We don't understand it yet, so that's why it's Nasa v'Nishma. And so both things are necessary. One, the level of acceptance is necessary, but that has to come first, not second. Then you have to learn as best you can why. But if somebody says to you, you have to put on film, because you're a Jew. You have to put on film every day that isn't Shabbos and Yom Tov. So if a Jew says, okay, I want to learn why. I want to learn what the halachas of this are. I want to understand what the spiritual content of this is. And when I get that through my head and I understand it and I have a feeling for it, I'll put on film. Sounds reasonable? Not reasonable for a Jew. That is not our dynamic. Our dynamic is, if we are satisfied that it's God's order to do that. And how do we know that? Because it's in the Torah. And how do we know that the Torah is true? Is because 3 million people heard it and nobody's ever argued with it ever since. So if it's Ratzon Hashem to put on film, what was the greatness of Am Yisrael then and continues to be the greatness of Am Yisrael now, is that they say, first of all, we accept your Torah, and then we're going to try and understand it. And I'll give you an example. You know, everybody sitting around this table, everybody listening to the tape, everybody knows what the Holocaust was. Everybody knows the level of evil that was perpetrated on Am Yisrael. So logic would be, if you want to understand first and only then do, logic would be that you'll never understand it, so we won't have Jews anymore. You won't have Jews doing anything anymore. But that's not what happened. We were faced with the most outrageously terrible difficulty by absolute brute animals who perpetrated the worst evil that humanity's ever seen, and within 5 minutes in terms of history, you have more bums sitting on seats learning Torah today than you had before the war. Why? How? Because Am Yisrael have this commitment, whether you notice it or not, whether it's but I promise you it's there, that when you're satisfied that something is Ratzon Hashem, you accept it, and then you find out about it later on. And both things are necessary. One is the acceptance level, that is necessary, but equally necessary is that you've then got to go off and learn it. And I want to tell you that this Nasa v'Nishma on its own is so powerful that let me just summarize what we've learned together so far. What we've learned together so far is this, that it's not enough to go and stand in front of a Rebbe and be judged by that Rebbe, and the Rebbe share a giloi with you, a revelation with you. I'll just share a quick story. We're running out of time, but I'll share a quick story that happened. I'm sure I've said this in the shir before. If some of you have heard it, you'll forgive me. I mean, Ronan has a nearly 100% attendance record for about 35 years, so you've probably heard it many times. But there used to be a rabbi called Silberman, and he used to be in Dover Heights, and he retired to Surfers Paradise. And we used to go to Surfers Paradise 100 years ago with the little children. We used to go with our friends, the Mosses, and he was retired there. And David, who likes to learn, one of my sons-in-law likes to learn, so they came with us, and he did a deal with Rabbi Silverman that we would pick him up in my car and take him to Minka and drive him home after Ma'ariv if he would learn Gemara with us for, I can't remember, an hour before Minka. So that's what we used to do every year. And so one year he's telling us the story that when on his bar mitzvah, his father, and he grew up in Glasgow in Scotland, he said that his father took him to some Rebbe. My son-in-law will remember, it was a very great Rebbe, and to get a bracha on his bar mitzvah. And Rabbi Silverman's father said to him, look, you're going in to see a holy, holy Jew. He can work miracles, and you can ask for whatever you want, and you'll get it. If you really believe, if you have a munah in it, you'll really get it. So he went into the Rebbe, and he came out, and he said, and I asked for good health and arikas yomim, long life. So, and he said, I'm 97, and I've never seen a doctor in my life. Right? And David is quiet, and he's shocked, and he says, but how come you didn't ask for a bracha for learning? Because for David, learning is sacred, right? So he says, stop the car! So I stopped the car, and he turns around with effort, because he's 97, and he says, listen to me carefully. He said, learning is yagia. Learning is effort. You can't have a bracha for learning. Learning is earned. You have to go to work to learn. So that was the first thing. The first step that YTRO said to Moshe Rabbeinu is don't think that you can elevate these people by showing them your saintliness. They've got to go to work. They've got to go to work to elevate themselves and their environment. The second thing that we have to learn from this is that you and I have the power to elevate our gashmias, our physicality, into spirituality, into goodness and kindness, and not being self-absorbed all the time for everything that we think we want for ourselves, but to help other people, to elevate the world. And we have the power to see the sounds and hear the sights. We have the power to do that. It's a matter of focus. It's a matter, and then we have to understand that our life has to be a life of Nasa v'Nishma. That first of all, we are shluchim of Hashem in the world. We are agents of Hashem to get a job done, to elevate the world and to bring holiness into Gashmias. And that's our first thing. And the second thing is to understand all the details about it. So let's give each other a bracha. We can do it. L'chaim, l'chaim.